Hello everyone, welcome to SarderTV. I'm Vaishali Jain. We have the pleasure of having Aashish Kalra with us today. Aashish is the chairman of Cambridge Technology Enterprises and Cambridge Innovations, focused on the convergence of big data and cloud computing. He's a serial entrepreneur and he's here to tell us more about issues and trends in technology, venture capital, and entrepreneurship. Aashish, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Vaishali.
So you're currently chairman of Cambridge Technology Enterprises and Cambridge Innovations, which you took over in 2015. Tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are today and your professional journey throughout your career.
Born in India, moved to the US in the early 90s, became a venture capitalist and an entrepreneur by accident, which is the story of my life, serendipity, and realized that what I really loved is innovation, is the act of creative destruction, of creating new things. I don't do very well in large organizations, and it could be a reason that I got where I was because no one would give me a job. So I had to employ myself.
Did you ever try your hand at working for a large organization?
No.
Never.
Never. This was my first job, was creating a venture fund. And this was in the early 90s, you know. There weren't that many venture funds, and even the large ones were a few hundred million, you know. Where Kleiner raised their last fund yesterday, it was 1.4 billion, you know. That was unheard of in our day. So I have worked with large organizations.
But never for one.
Never for one.
How did you become a serial entrepreneur by accident?
The one terrible thing about the global education system, especially the US education system, is they are trying to create drones for large organizations. So by the time you end up with your grad school degree or undergrad degree, people only think there's two kinds of jobs in the world, McKinsey or Goldman Sachs. Now, it could have different names, but those are the only two jobs, when that is really, really far from the truth. And if you want to instill a culture of entrepreneurship and risk-taking, failure has to be rewarded. You have to try new things, and you have to keep trying new things, and sometimes you have to be too dumb and stupid to die, right? Because everyone will tell you there's a better widget, someone else has done it. And if that was the case, there was always a taxi. Why would there be Uber? There was always a hotel room. Why would there be Airbnb? So that logic doesn't work, but that's not the logic they teach you in school. Anyway, I had a friend of mine and we started discussing exactly this. He was a successful entrepreneur and he said, look, we build a company a year. Is there a way you can harness innovation and do 6 companies a year? I was very young and naive. I said, yes, this seems like a very easy problem to solve. I wrote a paper and I said, here's the solution. Then we went to work on the solution. And we realized it wasn't that simple because first we thought it was people. So why not build a back office operation in the US and India that any idea you had could leverage it? And this is, I'm speaking early 90s. There was no real major IT presence in India either. That didn't go well, you know. Our entrepreneurs wanted to own everything. They didn't trust anyone who was not in their organization. We went through a couple of iterations and then we realized, you know what? As long as you have $10 million of revenue, it makes you viable. So what we need is to find a global partner that has such a diverse range of businesses that no matter what product you create, they could help you get traction to 10 million of revenue. And that's where Cambridge Samsung Partners was born, which was a 50-50 joint venture between our group, Cambridge, and the chairman of Samsung, which also had its challenges because this was at the height of what they called the IMF crisis, even though it was a homegrown Korean crisis. And at the same time, here was this large organization, and here was this young, nimble organization trying to figure out entrepreneurship. To try and marry the two was very challenging, to be diplomatic about it.
Tell us a little bit about Cambridge Technology Enterprises and Cambridge Innovations and the mission and the purpose of the company.
Right. So the DNA of the group I work with, which is Cambridge Technology, has over the years created some very successful businesses in the US with every wave of technology. So first was Unix client server. There was a company called Cambridge Technology Partners that went public, eventually got bought by Novell. Then there was a company by the name of Open Environment Corporation that built the middleware architecture for these companies, went public again. Then there was a company by the name of OneWave that brought it to the web, the enterprise to the web. Then there was iCube that essentially took your legacy systems and created SAP-like client-server architecture. And then there was Seabridge around the internet. So with every wave, there's been something that's been done. So there's two parts to the group. A, we create our own companies, and secondly, we will invest in other businesses, right, through a variety of different vehicles, but predominantly with our own capital, very limited outside capital. And what we saw, my partner and I, was there was this big opportunity, I'm speaking 2014, in the convergence of cloud and big data that will allow you to take what is ideas that can be called experiments and then rapidly scale them. That technology never existed. You either were speaking scalable or you were speaking prototype. You could not marry the two. This now gave you the flexibility. The second aspect was big data. So far, only the experts, statisticians, economists, etc., had access to data and ability to compute that data to make sense of it. Now, with the visualization tools and the big data expertise, an ordinary person could be able to use it, right? So you take an example of traffic management. You have apps like Waze. It's big data and cloud converging together to allow someone to make sense of it. So around this whole wave, we felt there was going to be tremendous innovation and a tremendous creative destruction, right? New, better things would be created. So, and this would then be fueled by AI and machine learning. Automation would start playing a bigger role in this. So that was the whole thesis of the idea.
Tell us how you think big data and cloud computing is going to change things and change the way the world operates today.
I think of big data essentially as a natural resource. It's like air, water. Because how does one take decisions without having data available? Right? Now, if you start looking at it, how does that impact your life? If I gave you a better sense of data on crime demographics where you live, or educational standards, not just on a holistic school level, but down to your teacher, down to the history or the math class, or how progression would happen, your ability to make decisions change, right? In your simple way, it's changing. Now you have apps like OpenTable. Earlier, when I came to America, fatigue would set in. You would call 6 restaurants, maybe 10. Maybe you had an assistant, you would call 30. But you could not look at 10,000 in a nanosecond. You can now. It's a simple application. You look at ways you want to go from point A to point B. It tells you how to get there in the fastest time with real-time information, again, helping you make decisions. So the list is long, right? It's easy to get to, but when we think big data cloud, we tend to think, oh, it's the C-suite executives trying to, yes, that's part of it. How do I say Vaishali is my client? If you look at a large bank today, by and large, Vaishali is not their client. They have a credit card client, they have a mortgage client, they have a credit risk client, but they don't have you as a client. They're only looking at you through history and a profile of history, not your future. Right? Now, could you bring social feeds into account? Could you bring other projections into account and demographics and saying, well, Vaishali has a graduate degree, she went to Columbia, she's not very old, still has 20, 30, 40 years of working life left, she's held stable jobs, so we think she's a better credit risk and she should be given credit for the mortgage. Right? That's a different way of looking at risk completely versus trying to extrapolate history. Then you have other aspects of it in medicine. A doctor only sees so many patients, and in those so many patients she sees so many diseases. And a certain sense of bias sets in. Now if you have things like AI and big data looking at that problem, you have counterintuitive results. You have non-linear pathways to thought that we humans are not very capable of. So it's a big, big world.
How do you think organizations are doing so far in employing big data and cloud computing, and especially with some of these things that you've spoken about in helping to sort of predict the future?
It's very early days. I age myself. I was there during the turn of the century and when the internet came about. The first challenge really is, for most of these organizations, how do you capture the data? Right? Because you have data from the shop floor, the machines, you have data from point of sales, you have data from logistics, you have data from social feeds. You have all this data. A, what part are you capturing and how are you capturing it? Two, how are you storing it? Is it even accessible? And A, if it's accessible, is it even accessible in the time frame you want it accessible? That's why a lot of databases are moving into the operating system to give you direct access, but then there's limited amount of storage in the operating system. So what data goes there, what doesn't go there? So the first challenge really is, and I don't think most large organizations have figured out the enormity of the challenge, is in order for you to be able to utilize big data, you first need to spend a lot of time cleaning it up. Which is why we've created a division called Cambridge BizServe. Because we realized this when we work with larger clients and we have these data feeds, we just realized there's no third party we can go to clean it up. Then is the whole infrastructure of scalable computing. That I think is evolving, and you have people like Amazon, cloud services, you have a bunch of players that have come in, Microsoft Cloud, the cloud's everywhere. But the definition of the cloud is very amorphous. For someone, it's a server with an internet connection. For someone else, it's something different, right? I think we're evolving, but we're probably a little more evolved on the hardware side than we are on the actual data side. Then you have the visualization piece, because now you have the data, how do I visualize it? How do I store it, visualize it, what do I do? So those are real challenges, and I think today people are looking at it as the tip of the iceberg. They want an immediate result to show ROI. The problem with immediate results are you've not solved the problem. It's a long-term fix, and by the time you're solving it, and if you don't architect it well, your data is pretty much doubling every 6 months or every year, which used to double every 10 years and before, in the 16th century, probably every 300 years. So we have a different level of problem now.
So Cambridge Innovations works as the venture arm of the organization. Tell us a little bit more about how that part of the organization works.
It's similar to that thought process, which is, so I'll digress for a second, as I love entrepreneurs. And there's roughly 50,000 companies created in America every year. Less than 10 of them have 90% of the value. Less than 3% of venture capital money flows to seed and early stage. Well, early stage is defined as over 10 million, which is not my definition. So it's a little larger, maybe it's 7%, but 3% of the money, that's roughly $350 million for 50,000 companies that's available. It's not much, right? So odds are already stacked against you. How do you get from point A to point B? Because nothing succeeds like success. When you're successful, everyone shows up. And I firmly believe that the current venture capital model is broken. And it's broken because of the economics of the way venture capital is set up. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some great venture capitalists. But the logic I use with my team is, if you were really good at what you did, you'd be an entrepreneur. How many venture capitalists do you know who have made $1 billion? You'll be hard pressed to name a few. How many? And all of them are entrepreneurs if they made $1 billion, because they've created a company and they built an organization. How many entrepreneurs do you know? I'm sure you can name a dozen, right? So A, the best and the brightest are not going to be venture capitalists or bankers, right? Essentially what you're getting is a new breed of bankers in there. Secondly, you have what's called the 220 rule. For people who aren't familiar with it, you get a 2% management fee on the amount of money you manage and 20% of the profit above a threshold. Now, average returns have been around somewhere between 10 and 13%. Now, with your hurdle being 8 to 10%, that means you're getting 60 basis points of profit over a 10-year fund. That's not very much money to keep you motivated. So what do? You increase what's called AUM, assets under management, so the 2% becomes dominant, right? So if you have a $2 billion fund, that's $40 million a year that you're going to make. Now, I'm going to be very hard pressed to tell you how my expenses can be $40 million a year, especially when I have 5 funds and I'm managing $10 billion, right? So the numbers just start moving in a direction which makes it broken on two sides of the equation. One, there's very, very few. When I started in the 90s, almost every venture capitalist was an entrepreneur that was then helping. That ecosystem became about enlarging AUM, and then you became more like a banker, because people who manage large sums of money are different. So we have on one side an entrepreneur who has everything stacked against him or her. On the other side, we have very limited capital, contrary to what people say, that is trying to marry this. But more than capital, yes, this guy needs fuel to move forward, but he also needs a direction, a navigation system, tires, all this other stuff, if you use that analogy. So now, how do you help him or her? So our thesis, which I briefly mentioned earlier, how do you innovate more than one company a year? Because that's your passion, and we've been through. So in this iteration, we are saying, all right, let's harness the passion of the entrepreneur. Let's call him, in this analogy, the engine. You have a great engine. You need to build a car around it. Now, if I can help the guy build the car around it, which is fairly a pedestrian job, it's a door and tires, can he then spend more time doing the two things he must do, which is marketing, getting a client, and maybe raising capital, instead of spending his time trying to build non-core activities of 20 people who code in Java or Perl or whatever the latest thing is. We married the two at innovations. We said, A, we'll give you capital, and B, we will give you access to rapid prototyping and a scalable team. You can have a 2-person team, you can have a 20-person team, and you can scale it up and down based on when you have work. And that's the experiment or the model that we are trying to now see if it works. We thought there were 3 challenges to it. A, could we find quality deals? B, would the entrepreneurs like this as a model? And C, could we pivot our organization from working with large-scale clients to actually start to work with smaller scale clients? Because here you're building enterprise scale, and here you're trying to do rapid prototyping and component base. So far it seems to work. When we announced it, I said we'll do 12 deals by March 17. We've done 12 deals already in the program. We've now recalibrated it and said we'll do 50 deals by March 19 in the program.
Talk a little bit about some of the investments then that you've made so far in these startups. What types of companies?
We have a predisposition on B2B enterprise, or it might be B2B2C enterprise, but very rarely do we do hardware or do we do B2C. It's just what we don't really understand very well. The broad theme is it is about cloud and big data. It's fueled by AI. Within that, we are trying to build verticals. And in each vertical, we have a thesis. So there's a little bit of method to the madness in which when you see a transaction or a deal or you meet an entrepreneur, you can fit it somewhere, right? So one theme is automated autonomous automobiles. So we believe by 2020 or 2022 or 2025, there's a finite period of time, within the next 5 to 10 years, you will have driverless cars. And as you have driverless cars, what are the other things you need? For example, you will need service, roadside assistance. Your car will still break down. It breaks down today. It'll still have a flat tire. So we found a bunch of bright young guys from Carnegie Mellon and Harvard, based in the US. And they were doing a lot of things around this whole space, but they weren't focused purely on roadside assistance. And we said, wouldn't it be good if this is what you focused on? It's a huge market. Every insurance company gives you free roadside assistance. That means they're buying it from someone. Every car you buy gives you 2-3 years of roadside assistance. They're buying it from someone. The 2 biggest markets that are growing that don't have any are India and China. So why don't you move to India? Let's get a couple of insurance companies that you can work with, then move to China. So this company moved to India. It signed up Reliance Insurance. It signed up Bharti AXA. It's got the largest gas station in India, the chain they're working with. It's got one of the competitors of Uber, because when people go long distance, they need service. And now it's moved to China. The first insurance company in China is going live, right? And they've just raised a little bit of capital as well. So that's one example of us working with them now. As the entrepreneur here, Rohan Malhotra is his name, he tells me, look, your guys built me a product that would have taken me 2 years to build and probably multiple millions of dollars. But most importantly, it allowed me to get on a plane with my entire team and go and move to Shanghai so we could get China launched. China is the single biggest market. It is 25 million cars a year. It has no roadside assistance. Where would you be? In the biggest market. You have to be there. So that's one example. And from that is a germ of an idea started to emerge, which is, can we take US businesses to India and China? And then Indian businesses to China and Chinese businesses to India. But that's a germ of an idea.
What are some of the other sectors or verticals that you're investing in and that you are bullish on?
We pretty much only invest in Boston, San Francisco, New York. Very US-centric in our business. Called Valet Anywhere, on-demand parking. Now, lots of people tried on-demand parking and they failed. Valet Anywhere is succeeding there by saying, look, I will give you annual contracts, right? You're going to, if you have a car in New York, you're probably using it 2-3 times a month, if that. So can we give you half the price or 30% of the price, deliver it to you, and also take care of all the other issues you have with the car: pollution check, service, cleaning, filling up the gas. You don't have a gas station, or very few gas stations here. So again, tomorrow maybe it's hydrogen fuel, it's batteries. Either way, it's a service that has to be filled. So that's one sector. The other sector is cloud big data that's powered by AI. So an example is a company called Auths, Authentic Assessment, with Chris Kaiser, who's the ex-provost of MIT. He's always felt, why are we still in this 21st century and using a number 2 pencil to test someone? There has to be a better way. Especially when what you want to know is, if I hire Vaishali, how do you fit in my organization? Are you going to be mediocre, subpar, exceptional? Because that's really what I'm looking for. Which boils down, how do you take a textbook to a test? With the machine. Simple ideas, complex executions, working on that. There's a company called Comply Global. As you move forward in life and you have global businesses like this is, the level of compliance, regulatory, government, with your client information is very complex. So it allows you to figure out a way to automate that and get it done. The other sectors we are excited about. So these two we have made substantial amount of investments in. And then there's a natural, ecosystem that develops. Valet Anywhere works with Roadzen, right? These companies work together when they can, if they want to. The next one is IoT, Internet of Things. We're very keen on IoT and energy in particular. So there's a company called Eneralize that we have an investment in that does thermostats for small, mid-size franchisees. Dunkin' Donuts, Panera Bread, Foot Locker, just to name franchisees, not their clients. Labor costs are rising. Variable costs you can't control anymore because it's labor and raw material. You have to focus on fixed cost, which is energy. Now, if you've looked at a normal thermostat, it's a plastic cover, right? Maybe it's set right, maybe it's not set right. Secondly, with IoT, you have preventative maintenance. The HVAC unit will actually tell you, I'm about to break, come fix me. So it's not just the cost saving of fixing the HVAC, it's also the loss of clients, because the day it's not working, people aren't going to eat there. So that's another sector. Healthcare is a sector we are interested in, right? How do you make it more efficient? It's a natural place for big data to be applied. Energy, smart grids, things. It's going to be a 20, 30, 40 trillion dollar transformation, all the way from virtual power plants to smart grids to everything. So that's kind of the sectors. It's pretty much the whole universe.
Tell us about how your business model works.
There's 3 levels to our business model at Cambridge Technology. 1, we want to educate and train the best people in the world. Now, the problem is the best people don't want to work with us. For that matter, they don't want to work with anyone. They want to work for themselves. That's my definition of the best people, right? I'm not saying that the rest of the world is good, but in my equation, these are the best and the brightest. They're changing the world, they're changing the universe. So I can do the next best thing, which is I can take bright people and I can get them to work with the best and brightest in the world. That's training that I could never buy, right? If I can have 5 people work with Chris Kaiser at MIT, or I can have 4 people work with Rohan, who's building out a new market in China, it's invaluable to the organization, right? So that's one. That has a second aspect to it, is it really helps me recruit better, because people get to do exciting things. I ask this all the time. We are a fast growing organization. We are now 350 people in the company, and we'll probably be at 500 plus by next year, which is a substantial number because we also get rid of 10% of our workforce every 6 months, right? To make sure that people are motivated. But when I say we get rid, we don't fire them. We give them every opportunity to learn, to retrain, and if they still cannot do it, then we help place them somewhere else. So there's some, as Schumpeter said, there has to be some degree of creative destruction constantly, otherwise you get complacent. The second aspect we gain from it is we are creating our own clients. I get to, as Rohan's company Roadzen does better, they use more resources from Cambridge Technology. At some point, they can become like one of our bigger clients, Schneider or Colgate or etc. And then they can be a multi-million-dollar client. I created my own client. Nothing better than this, right? And then lastly, we have equity upside because we've invested in them. So that's the business model. But most importantly, we have fun. I'm constantly engaged with young entrepreneurs, or not so young entrepreneurs, but entrepreneurs who are changing the world. So every day you're discussing and looking at things in a whole new way. Never get old.
How does it make sense to invest in US-based companies? You said you focus on purely US-based investments that also have a focus on an international market like China and India.
That's the germ of an idea.
What are your thoughts behind that?
It intuitively makes sense to me. The only place in the world with real growth is India and China. The 2 biggest markets in the world are India and China. If you're changing a product, building a product that changes the world, yes, you have to build it in the US. It's the biggest market in the world. It's got the best ecosystem in the world. You're going to meet an entrepreneur who's done it twice or thrice before, and the valuations are the most reasonable, right? But at some point, these guys have to find other markets. You take the example of Uber. Didi does more rides in a day than Uber does globally in a day, right? They do, I think, 14 million rides now, or 11 million, some insane number, and then Uber globally does 2 or 3 million, right? So that's the difference. Intuitively, it makes a lot of sense. As a legacy, it makes a lot of sense. If you can bring India and China closer together and forge economic ties and let the young people explore, look, that's more than 60% of the humanity's population, right?
Tell us about what your outlook is for venture capital funding in the US this year.
That's a very broad question. So let's break it into 3 parts. One, my outlook on entrepreneurship is very bright because every day you see bigger and bigger examples, even though it's less than 10 companies that make those examples of Facebook, Uber, and then the people who have built them and the Googles of the world, that people in university now want to be an entrepreneur. That's changing. When we grew up, That's not something you heard every day. The second is there is far more capital available than it ever was. So even though I said it's 3%, it's now 350 million. Whereas earlier it was sub 50 million. Right? So there's other funding sources available. But I think the future of venture capital itself will change. Because I personally believe that the whole venture capital private equity model is broken. It's all right when you're making 14, 15, 20% returns and I can give the investor, 10, 12, 14. But if I'm giving the investor 4, 5, 6, it doesn't make sense. You're getting too big, So there's a complete vacuum at the seed and early stage almost. And then you have these mega firms at the later stage. And when you do later stage, what are you going to do? Growth's not what you do. You buy a business, you try and make it more efficient, you consolidate businesses, and that's the first sign of a shrinking market. The easiest way to kill anything is to put it in a shrinking market. It dies. I could sit there with a few $1 billion and buy Hertz and Avis and everything else and combine them, but the rental business, because of things like Uber, etc., is shrinking.
Tell us about some of the successful startups that you've created as an entrepreneur.
Most of them do. And I'll give you an anecdote. There's a business we were involved in, we were invested in, called ThriveHive. It's kind of like HubSpot. I remember when my partner was taking it over, he called me and he said, well, looking to do this deal, the company's in big trouble, we take it over. And I asked him, so is there a market for it? And he said, there's a market for everything. The only question is, should I spend my time on this? Because we'll make anything succeed if I spend time on it, right? Which is very different from portfolio theory of saying, 3 will succeed in 7. You focus on it, you'll bob, weave, dodge, you'll end up at some point, you'll succeed. And the business recently got sold after a year of building it out to that example, right? So my whole point is the only time you fail in life is for 2 reasons. A, you didn't focus on it. You cut your losses. Or that's what school has taught you. You must cut your losses, portfolio theory. Or 2, there were external factors that were just so seismic that you could not control them. But then that happens, right?
Tell us about a company that you started but failed.
So I'll give you the example of Tricona Capital, which I launched in 2006, right? My concept in 2000, when India was the backwater, no one cared about India. I said, India will grow. What we need is a new asset class because global institutional investors will want to invest in India. Simple concept. What asset class? I said real estate and infrastructure, they're asset collateralized returns, easiest way. Few minor challenges along the way. Indian regulations didn't allow you to make investments in either of the 2 sectors. Global investors had never invested in India. No one had an underwriting. So we started working with Lehman to figure out an underwriting model for India. We worked with the Indian government to craft a policy, right? They had this thing called the Indian Investment Commission at that time, headed by Ratan Tata. And we raised, in those days, a $500 million fund initially, publicly listed it, and then raised further capital. So we were almost $1 billion, and we did almost 3x on our money. Things were good. We helped create one of the largest road companies in India, one of the largest real estate companies, the largest shipyard in India. I was so fixated on my risk of India that I completely lost track of the risk overseas. Because I always felt that India is where I will succeed or fail, and this is where business is risky, and this is where, that Lehman Brothers happens. Because we are so successful, we have almost 400 million of cash. We were one of the first guys listed in London as a fund, so we listed under mutual fund rules, so we didn't have any control. And hedge funds came in and took it over. And the next few years was litigation, but the lesson there was never forget your primary risk. I was fixated on the secondary risk because that's where I wanted to succeed, was the portfolio company in India, where my primary risk was the capital and the source of capital. Because as long as I had capital and source of capital, I could always do what I wanted to do. So it was a success. Yes, did we make some money? Yes. Did we lose a lot of money? Absolutely. But you learned something. And, and I had tremendous fun creating it because everyone would tell me this could not be done. First time fund manager, first time country, right? No regulatory support. Can't be done. You can't raise $1 billion. Set your goals lower. Maybe raise 50 million.
What are the lessons learned if you're giving advice to another entrepreneur? What have you learned from the mistakes that you've made in building a business?
I occasionally lecture at a lot of universities, and the thing I tell people, for you to be a successful entrepreneur, you have to have one quality. You have to be a cockroach. You have to be too dumb to die. Everyone will tell you it already exists. So I'll give you 2 anecdotes. One, turn of the last century, people used to send ships out. They used to cut icebergs, tore the iceberg over, and distribute it to homes and shops and other places to refrigerate things. Someone had a bright idea, you know what? I can build an ice factory and I can ship ice in big blocks to your house, right? That's why it's called an ice box. Someone had an even bright idea, said, I'll put a refrigerator in your home. Now, everyone solved the same problem, right? We kept your food from spoiling. Not one business in either of the 3 made it through. They're all solving the same problem. The second anecdote I'll give you is, you take a bottle, a glass bottle, you put the open end of it into a dark box. You put the other end of it in sunlight. Now you introduce a bee and a fly into it. A bee, everyone will agree, has more IQ than a fly, common housefly. Give it a few hours, the bee will die because it sees light as stimulus for exit. The fly will just zigzag around, bob weave. It'll finally find the opening and it'll be free and clear. So sometimes having too much IQ means you have a preconceived notion to stimuli and you will not change.
What advice do you give to people who want to start a business but might be hesitant to do so?
My first advice is, before you start a business, make sure you have a bare minimum level of economic support. Because if you don't have it, you'll always worry about money. And if you have to worry about feeding your children and paying your mortgage, you can't do it, right? So you need to have that. Assuming you have that as a foundation, now the question becomes, why do you want to do it? And that's the $1 million question. If it's to make money, that's a byproduct. You have to ask yourself, what am I really passionate about? What will make me want to wake up at 4 a.m. on my own accord, being so excited and work 18 hours, or get on a plane and not see my family for 2 weeks or 3 weeks because I'm achieving something? If you find that, it could be organic farming, it could be building a new semiconductor, it could be anything, right? Money is, my father used to tell me this, I come from a business family, it's like, money is a byproduct. First find something you passionately care about, because you only have one life, and if you wake up and you want to do that every day, you found what you want to do.
Now, when it came to your own businesses that you had started, did you raise money in the beginning years or did you bootstrap? And what advice do you give entrepreneurs?
I didn't really have the option of raising money. So we always bootstrapped all our businesses. Tricona was bootstrapped. Cambridge Samsung was bootstrapped. Now, underneath it, these businesses were money management. They raised money, but the general partner never raised any money. Cambridge Technology, when I took over, was already public, right? So it had raised money in the past, but so far we've been using internal accruals to fund it. Roadsends just raised money, but I think you need to get to a certain point to be able to raise capital. And I divide the world into two parts of companies. One is people who want to build cash positive businesses. And some businesses do require a lot of capital, don't get me wrong. And other businesses where people only want to raise money. They want to say, I raised 100 million. And I always tell my entrepreneurs who we work with, raising money is a bad thing. It leads to dilution. So if you're raising money, you need to show why it is worth more to you, right? It's okay to own 5% of $1 billion, but it's not okay to own 5% of 50 million, which you had anyway, right? You had 10% of it. So, and that's the question. A lot of entrepreneurs I meet get caught up in, but he raised 50 million, he raised 100. Well, what does your business need? What's the dilution you want to have?
How do you encourage the entrepreneurs that you do work with to build a culture of learning within their companies, within their startups, so that they can reach their goals? How do you do that?
There's an easy conversation on that. If you ever build a company or a product, please ensure that you have one customer. Because at the end of the day, you will achieve three things. A, you will at least have one person who wants your product. Two, you will learn to listen to a client instead of sitting in your own backyard saying this is how the world should work. And three, you'll be beaten like no one else can ever beat you, like a paying client. All great learning experiences. And then you scale from them. So speak to clients, engage with clients, listen to clients, have zero tolerance policy on unhappy clients. As Shakespeare said, the fault doesn't lie in the straws, Brutus, it lies in ourselves, right? So you have an unhappy client. It's your fault. He could be a demanding client, but it's an unhappy client.
Do you feel that there is a skills gap in organizations when hiring, specifically in IT roles?
Absolutely. But I think part of it is self-created. We tend to define IT into these narrow little boxes when it's a very innovative, transformative, ever-changing environment. You want very smart people. You want to tool them with the right skill sets and analytical approaches. And it doesn't matter if it's Java or Python or Perl, they should have the ability to work through it. And that's how we look at it. You know, every person in our organization, I forget how many hours they have to do, but it's a very significant amount of time has to be spent on training, on learning new things, but training towards a customer's goal. Right? So we're working towards this. We're trying to build an expertise, let's say, in healthcare. What are the technologies today? What are we showcasing? Are we working in security? Right? But I think the first cultural issue comes in organizations saying, well, I have Oracle, I want 20 Oracle DBAs. Well, then guess what? You'll always be stuck on Oracle. Solve the problem by saying, I need a real dynamic database that does X, Y, and Z. Now you will end up with a workforce that can translate to the solution versus just a symptom.
So is this why you think a skills gap exists?
That's why it does. For example, at my early organization, Cambridge Technology, in its many avatars, we were probably always one of the largest recruiters at Yale, Harvard, all these schools. But we used to recruit from history, English, physics, departments other people didn't go to, right? They went to computer science. Reason being, you got into Yale. You must be reasonably smart. You must have decent communications. Maybe you aren't analytically qualified. You'll be surprised how many of them were. But you could probably sell well. You could speak well, right? You're physics or math major. You're analytical. Computer science is not that far away, right? What you want is intelligence. And either people are willing to learn or they're not. You can't force them. So the first stage into building a learning organization is finding people who want to try different things, who want to innovate, who want to learn.
How do you think we could fix our education system to help the skills gap?
A friend of mine wrote an essay that he sent to me the other day. It was a very thought-provoking essay. And the main thesis was this. The best way to learn about anything in life is to have money at stake. Let's give every child in the US $10,000. Now we start them slow. Not risky investments, government bonds, treasuries, it's guided. But they are now learning about Germany because they hold a bond in Germany. They learn about Brexit. You learn culture, you learn history, you learn everything. As you grow and you mature, the amount of money is increased. You can take maybe a few more bets with your money, right? You could buy stocks. You could look into genomics. Imagine how much you learn about genomics. You have money at stake, right? So it's how to take that Bloomberg terminal and make it the tool of learning in a classroom. I thought that to be very innovative because, yes, you do need basic infrastructure. You do need basic teachers, right? And every now and then you will have brilliant teachers who will spark. I'm sure if you look through your childhood, there'll be one or two names that'll spring to mind who sparked real curiosity that you enjoyed working with. But by and large, most of them were pedestrian, but they served their purpose, right? You don't need everyone to be exceptional. There's obviously something wrong when we spend the most and people can't sign their name, right? But that's, again, I think the problem is you're not defining the problem well enough, which is the same thing I said. For an organization, you want a dynamic database. You don't need 20 Oracle DBAs. Same thing here. What kind of culture do we want? What kind of people do we want in that culture? And you will still need the service people. You still need other people. There's nothing wrong with it. Everyone will not be a Bill Gates or a Steve Jobs, right? That 1% will find themselves. They could be living in a hut in the middle of nowhere. They'll find themselves. They're uniquely qualified, right? All you have to do is when you happen to find one, is just give him room or her room to grow. On the rest, what are the basic skills you want as a culture and as a nation you need to decide? Then invest your money in that. And I think we have been really, really terrible at defining that.
Well, this was great, Aashish. Thank you so much.
Thank
this
you,
was
Vaishali.
great. And we'll see you next time on SarderTV.